You didn't just talk about changing the culture. What you did is a way of changing the culture.
When I was considering this position and looking at the job description, and particularly that part about innovation, I Googled innovation, sorry, I Googled innovation frameworks. And if you do that and go to pictures, you'll probably find something like this. Um, a lot of those images are, in fact, from Gartner for some reason. They have good SEO for innovation framework keyword. Um, Good for them. Um, it's not their framework exactly or at all. First of all, it's an amalgamation of three frameworks, neither of which were invented by Gartner nor claimed to be invented by Gartner. This is all for clarity. Um, Instead, this framework is popularized by Gartner and many others. And so I thought, looking at the amalgamation and looking at the frameworks, I realized that I've worked with all of those frameworks in the past and in the present. And they spoke to me for that reason. And they seem right to me based on my experience. And having sort of Gartner validate that is not a bad day in the office. Um, I've taken this image and made it prettier while keeping the same sense of what we're doing. So this is the cognitive framework for innovation. It consists of three separate frameworks. First one is design thinking, the first leg of the movement, the first line. In the lower right where it says T number one, that's Tango number one, that's our end goal, that's what we want. And then empathize, define, prioritize insights, and hypothesis. This leg of the journey is known as design thinking. It's a well-established process for churning out good work. Customer development framework is something that was invented, formalized, popularized by a fella named Steve Blank, who is a 9-time Silicon Valley entrepreneur who's spent last 20 years or so as a professor at Stanford and a consultant for NASA and a bunch of other uh, companies and government institutions. Um, and a man has written a number of books, all of it, and content, steveblank.com, uh, all of it brilliant. Customer development framework, invented by Steve Blank, is a de facto standard for startups. If you're not doing it, you're not doing it right. Well, unless results prove otherwise, right? But if you have the results, you're probably stumbled upon the framework without knowing it. It's something like that. And so that cycle consists of customer discovery and customer validation. I'll say a few words about that soon. Um, but after that customer development cycle is completed, then it goes into the lean startup cycle. Um, Roughly, the way we can think about these frameworks, so these three frameworks, and roughly the way we're going to take this, what I think of as a monthly framework, we'll put it in here. And so that entire innovation framework will fit into one of these cycles. And then each cycle, it will repeat. And so when I say Groundhog Day, this is what I mean. This is our yearly framework, and this is our monthly framework. And we'll have a weekly framework as well. And so the way we could think about it is in week 1 of the cycle, we'll go through the design thinking leg of the journey. In week 2 of the cycle, we'll go through the customer development leg of the journey. In week 3, we'll go through the lean startup leg of the journey. Week 4 goes to the dogs. We can't expect perfect execution. In fact, we can expect the opposite. And so there needs to be a bit of buffer built in within these activities. For example, lean startup alone demands a bit of preparation before the pseudocode, which is a to-do list for developers, is handed over to the developers for completion, etc. But this is where the cloud team in the design thinking part of the phase must coordinate with the business units. Very important to coordinate with the business units. To me, that's Ivan and Bob. And extremely important to communicate with UX, because that's our unfair advantage. The fact that we have Jason and his UX team is our unfair advantage. Software development is expensive, hugely expensive. Having an engineer code something is really, really, really expensive. I'll give you an example. In 2016, I was pricing out an e-commerce platform. Development cost was, I'll give you tall, grande, and venti. The tall order was about 100K. If we were to dump 100K into software development, we could get the product MVP, minimum viable product, minimum valuable product. Probably to get it to where it needs to be. But a grande version of that was like 300K. 300K would be a little more comfortable, you know? The real cost was really like 500K. I started looking around and I discovered some tools, UX tools, Adobe XD, for example, Sketch, Pixelmator. These are great, great tools that in fact enabled me to produce what we needed, which was just a demo for an investor, to see if they would invest further. Because, you know, competing against anyone who's in e-commerce competes against Amazon. And so you need money in the bank to get the legs under you in order to be a viable competition, or just, you know, let's say be profitable. What would have costed us 100K at the minimum, I was able to develop myself, no code, zero code, just design panels, just UX, clickable, no difference in the feel and look between the real thing, without writing a single line of code. These are just huge, tremendous cost savings that the market hasn't adjusted for. The software development still costs an arm and a leg. But we now have tools that have emerged and disciplines such as UX that have emerged that can get a functional design, look, and feel in front of our customers, and we can ask them for money. There's an old saying in a startup world: if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. So when we put our design panels that Jason and his UX team can churn out like that, we're going to ask for money and we'll settle for advice. This theme of what got us here won't keep us here, and the need for innovation as being not merely a meaningless word, which is often what it is, but in fact an imperative for us. The complexity of cloud space in particular is, well, very easy to experience if you're merely look up at the sky. Things are exactly never the same moment to moment. And that pretty well describes cloud space proper as well. And so we need to establish our team as a nimble team, as an agile team. I don't mean that in product management process sense of that word, although we're very much going to lean into agile methodologies. But I'm talking about us as a business unit being a business unit of an agile sort. Design thinking is something that has existed for decades. Well, that's such a biased statement. Sorry. Design thinking has existed for as long as humans have existed. Design thinking as an articulated process that people engage in professionally in terms of software has been formalized for decades. That's more accurate. And then there's the a lean startup model for software delivery and customer development model that's liberally borrowed from one of my favorite people, Steve Blank. Blank is his last name, not me forgetting his last name. Now, it behooves you to juggle innovation frameworks because you don't want to invent how you do innovation. There's already an established process that produces innovation. And that's the thing that I think is most misunderstood about innovation proper. Breakthroughs are great, but it's the tedium of the detail and the process engineering that moves the needle. It doesn't make for a great story, unfortunately. But it's the tedium. Sorry, everyone. It's the tedium that produces results. And so we'll focus on the tedium. I took this slide and made it a little prettier for us. Okay, so let's explain what this means. We want to start with the end goal in mind. And the end goal in mind is illustrated in the bottom left. We want Tango number 1. What that means, we can talk about, we can debate, we can iterate on. Right now, what that means is that we lead in the cloud. And the way I think about leading in the cloud, it's a little bit like this. When Albert Einstein was meditating on his theory of relativity, later to be named, it didn't have a name then, he imagined himself sitting on the ledge of an ever expanding universe. And he asked himself, well, if the ever expanding universe is behind me and I'm sitting on its ledge with my toes dipped into the empty void of space in front of me, what is in front of me? Um, if we engage in that bit of thinking, when I think of Tango and cloud, leading the wave in cloud, the way I think about it is competitors sitting on the ledge of the ever expanding universe and staring off into the empty abyss of space before them and seeing us in the distance. This is how I see leading in cloud. That's a tall order. I have no idea how we're going to do it. Well, I guess I have some ideas. I hope that these ideas will be the bridge to us actually achieving that. And so, what Gartner did with their innovation framework, and we don't want to reinvent the innovation process wheel. We want to take what works, and this works. I've used all of these parts sometimes together, but more often independently of each other, and sort of orchestrating them together inside a corporate environment with a crackerjack team of dedicated resources who are moving at the speed of light. It's a new experience for me. So it's going to be interesting. But let's focus on the first leg first, this part that goes from T, number one, and leading into the middle of the cloud circle. That first leg of the process is known as design thinking. And we didn't do that when we built cloud. We said, you know what? We know expense management. We want to be in cloud. We know that our people will need analytics, our customers will need analytics. So let's build them analytics. And we have a kick-ass analytical engine. It's heads and shoulders better than pretty much anything else that's on the market in terms of the user experience, most certainly.
My first persona is essentially, say, a cloud analyst at your corporation, and this person may have just viewer access to predefined reports. So Tango will give them some out-of-the-box dashboards and reports and say, look, we pull your data down daily. You have AWS and Azure. Here's the reports we've made up and what you can execute. So we may see some forecasting reports to maybe start trending down some forecasted events that are easy to change and modify from 3 months to 6 months. We might want to look at some storage analysis to say, well, what is going on with my storage? What am I seeing from vendor to vendor, week by week? We could change those weeks to days. What are the storage details down in a much granular level? Again, we pull daily data down at, I'll equate it to CDR level style. So you're going line item by line item, each charge, each allocation, each product category and subcategory level, and maybe even just seeing your top usage drivers. So really specific reports driven around what we have going around with my environment, what are my usage drivers, or where's my spend or quantity usage across my categories, and maybe what cost centers are being charged. So simple persona, really easy to use. We get a little more complex, I'll actually jump into a designer level to walk through my other personas. And persona number 2 would be, let's say, a cost center manager. And a cost center manager may run their cost analysis with variance dashboard. So this person is asking, where are my costs coming from? Who are my top cost drivers? I manage a cost center, I manage a group of cost centers, and I want to be able to see it. We apply data level security, so I can only see maybe the cost centers that I'm assigned to, or in this case, for the purposes of this demo, every single cost center. So one of the things we'll see here is we have our visualizations around, we have total charges. You'll notice cost by vendor has multiple vendors down in one area, so we've normalized the data. very importantly here, we see our cost by cost center. So we have a region-based cost center. I can see where they're going across all my cost centers. Everything is clickable. So if I want to click on something in view, and you'll see my usage filters start to narrow down. If I want to really quick to view, I can see simple growth patterns that are happening. I could drill into a specific vendor by a visualization. And then as I go deeper, at any point in time, I could drill down. So I can take this and go down by days and very cleanly see my growth percentage differences, or even just my cost or any data trended out daily. I could go down and see how I'm spending category by category. So I can take my top drivers and maybe drill from category down to subcategory and see what's going on there. Who are my top drivers there? Maybe at a day by day level, I can see what's happening and who it's happening from. I could go further and say, by cost center, I can create a new report and maybe say cost center, record type, total vendors, move around my conditions and change it. But if I want to add something different, it's really quick to apply. So if I'm a cost center manager, and I'll delete this report real quick just to build it, we'll say, well, I just want to build a super quick report that gives me some information that makes a lot of sense to me at a cost center level. So I want to start at the cost center. Maybe I want to see record type. And this is to showcase how quick it is to just build a new report. I want to see it maybe by vendor cost. So what's the cost coming from vendor? What's the markup amount that we applied? So this is a report showing me that the vendor cost was like this on the invoice, or was like this in my vendor portal that I'm going to be charged, or my reserved instance is using up. But what's the total markup? I have business rules that say it's a 7% markup or a 5% markup against charges, different taxes, whether it's usage or whatnot, and show it to me by cost center. So now I can manage who's spending what their markup is, and even individualize reports of how I want to share them. Another persona would say, well, what about my cloud admin? Someone that's a little more specific to administering my cloud environment, and the CFO starts to say, I want to know if costs are rising and I want to know how they're trending. And he asks that admin to investigate. So a simple dashboard we've pre-built that can be modifiable is a virtual compute dashboard, which is taking from Azure and AWS virtual machine counts, spends, maybe even usage against it. But if we start to analyze the spend, we can see maybe the spend is going up even though our resources are going down. We can select a very specific day. Again, we can always drill down to the days if we want to see it, and kind of track day by day how our resources are allocating, coming and going, how the costs are rising or not rising. We can go back and drill down to anything really. So if I click choose another, I could even at this point say, oh, I want to see this by cost center, because that's where I'm having questions specifically. And I can see now on a visualization that was pre-built for me, it doesn't matter. I could see any one of my data. I'm seeing that visualization for AWS now represented to me by cost center. So I can see that the US East region is actually my highest spend. Below, I pre-built a simple report, easy to do and modify. So if I want to see maybe subtotals or grand totals, it's very easy for me to select and add them in, or remove them if I don't want them. It's very simple to add stacked conditions to maybe point out anything over 20% or anything over 5%. Even a growth column that I made myself is simple to change, whether it's percent change over time from previous month, or if I want to see a running sum or a running average. Pre-built functions that make building your report super easy. And likewise, if I want to change it from months and change it maybe to weeks or quarters, it's very simple to change around my report to what I see fit. But if we have this data and this user is looking in here and saying, well, we're definitely rising in cost. I'm noticing at the most recent month, US East is my cost center with the highest cost. Am I seeing anything there? Everything is connected. I can select a specific cost center for AWS, and it filters down my report immediately. I'm seeing my US East region cost center. I can look at growth patterns, and by simple just eye and seeing by my color coordinations, I can maybe spot where my trends are going up, where my costs are rising the most, maybe from 450 to 580 to 719. I'm seeing where the shift is happening. Amazon Simple Storage is where I got to look into. And even here, I can take any one of these and perhaps go in and say, well, what are the assets tied here? I'm going to modify the report, add my asset ID, what's my inventory. And once it's added, I can always download it, CSV, PDF, Excel, and send it to my team. If I don't want to do that, I could even just share a report or schedule it. So my virtual compute, if I want to share, it's very simple for me to pick my team member, say, here's a report. You can be a viewer, designer yourself. I can schedule it, email it, different frequencies that I want it to go, maybe every day, and that helps. And maybe I could go back to my cost analysis dashboard where any KPI exists and quickly build what's called a pulse. So this is a KPI measuring my percentage of growth over the previous months. I add to pulse. I give it a name, Apollo webinar demo. I say maybe when it goes over 10% on a previous month, let me know. Apollo webinar demo. I go to edit and I say who it goes to, everyone, or maybe even just a very specific team member. Give it a name, give it a message. Please check out the data. We have breached 10%. And it'll email that person. So a pulse is executed every time the data for that KPI is updated. So we currently are refreshing daily, pulling that data down. So every day it'll do that quote unquote pulse check. If that number KPI or a specific total charges KPI ever breaches, you're notified immediately. You'll be emailed, and your email will take you right to the dashboard where it was created to begin your analysis.
But we don't know where the space is going. We don't have a product market fit. That is the challenge that I'm starting with. We don't have an excellent product market fit. I have a hypothesis as to what the product market fit might be. I think we should go after the Halliburtons of the world. And by that, I mean companies who charge internal departments for cloud usage. This creates an incredible degree of complexity that our software is able to untangle. Untangle. And so it's probably something we should lean into. And then it's a bit of rejection marketing, right? We're saying the customer profile that fits us the best is this customer profile, ergo, implicitly, the other customer profile, so regular customers who don't charge their business units for cloud usage, may not be the right fit, except rejecting them only produces envy in the rejected customer, pretend rejected, and makes them want to try our software. At least that's the hypothesis. Because if it can untangle complex cost allocations, then certainly it can untangle and be useful in relatively simple cost allocations. And that, of course, is the case. So we're sort of punching through the customer segment that we're trying to reach. That's one of the hypotheses. Product market fit is essentially the focus of my next 3 months. So how does design thinking work? It works like this. Step one, empathize with the customer. Empathy is an art, 80%, and maybe 20% science. The way product mind approaches empathizing. But it has to do with having customer conversations. we should have more customer conversations. In any case, once the flow of input, everybody remember flow of input, one of the first slides, flow of input comes in from the customer into my brain, my team's brain, Tango brain. And it takes time to defrag. It takes time to think through the process. It takes time to uncover subtleties of communication. There's an old adage: if you ask people what they want, they'll just want a faster horse, not a car. I think Henry Ford said that. So customers have no insight into how a product should behave or should be built, but they do have an insight into their daily problems, and we need to be well acquainted with those daily problems. For example, one of the things that I uncovered with my meeting with the TAS team, and let me see if I can recall this correctly. There's a discrepancy in the thinking when it comes to cloud costs. So an IT manager or someone who's managing cloud costs receives his budget once a year, most likely, and then sort of plans the cloud cost allocation for the year, and it's set for a year. But if you're not paying attention to what's happening, and most people aren't, that was proven recently when AWS had a glitch, and the bunch of companies got overcharged for their cloud usage by a huge margin, blew out companies' yearly budgets, essentially. It was a glitch. It was fixed. But these overages or these sort of spikes are not accounted for in the mind of the IT manager, and they're irrelevant in the mind of the until it becomes a problem. So they think they need to have this cloud conversation once a year as the budgets sort of roll in. But we know that keeping an eye on your cloud expenses, and particularly overages, which is a word we don't use when it comes to overspending on cloud. Overages are a hideous word. It's a hideous concept. It makes my skin crawl. And I'd like to use it to stress the point that companies are overpaying for their cloud. Anyways, so once we go through this stewing process, defragging process of figuring out what's been told, we want to prioritize the insights we have extrapolated from the inputs, and decide which ones we want to test first, develop some hypothesis worth testing, and these hypotheses should be in a pixel form. We can take the hypothesis in front of the customer, no code, just pixels. And there's an old adage in the startup world that says, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. So we're going to take our hypothesis in a pixelated form, design panels, Jason's UX team, broadly speaking. We're going to take them in front of our customers, and we're going to ask them to buy it, and we'll settle for advice, which is yet another form of this empathic communication with the customer. Then we'll engage in a customer development cycle. We'll find out if the hypothesis fits a certain group of customers, and then we'll get in front of those customers and ask them. If the hypothesis passes the muster with the customers, it will be turned into pseudocode. Not a coding language precisely, but English language, an instruction set, a to-do list for the development team who does proper coding. And this is where the rubber meets the road. Coders are precious. Engineers are a precious resource. They should be used wisely. And code that gets written but not used is sinful. So we'll make sure that the code we end up coding is useful and wanted by the customer. So it'll still be somewhat of a guesswork. But as we go through each cycle repeatedly, we'll get better at making these guesses. Now, those of you who have taken a step further in your thinking and might wondering, how does this all fit together? This is a good time to sort of wrap up this chapter by explaining how it fits together. This innovation cycle that you're looking at right now will fit inside the 28 days monthly cycle. So we will go through this process every month. Roughly, the first leg of the journey, the design thinking, will take a week. Roughly, customer development leg of the journey will take another week. And roughly, lean startup leg of the journey, where we focus on continuous innovation, deployment, and defining the metrics, will take another week. That's 3 weeks out of 4. 1 week goes to the dogs. 1 week is breathing room for us to fail, because failure will be inevitable. One of the reasons why there needs to be a VP of product for cloud is because, well, obviously Ivan is spread across multiple products, spread too thinly as it is. But this process of product market fit that we need to undergo is fraught with failure. Emotionally, it feels like stepping on a rake and hitting yourself in the face repeatedly. Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. And it helps if you don't have other things to contend with. If you have other things to contend with, it can break you. And so going back to that focus and blocking out what's not primary becomes highly important. Well, in any case, as I continue to socialize what it is that Cloud Team does and how we are implementing this innovation framework at the ground level, all of this is largely theoretical and nice. But the way we implement it at the ground level where the rubber meets the road, it all remains to be seen and worked out, and frictions remain to be removed, etc. Pulling back a little, what this helps us do, it helps us conceptualize our 28-day journey as a kind of a hero's journey, right? We're all familiar with hero journeys from Carl Jung, from the guy that wrote Hero with 1,000 Faces. What's his name? Campbell, Joseph Campbell. And obviously from movies that have adopted Campbellian hero's journey model. We've all grown up with that model in our minds, watching TV shows and movies. Um, and what this innovation framework allows us to do is to have specific acts inside this 28-day cycle. So you can think of a design cycle as act one of a movie, customer development cycle as act two of the movie, and lean startup leg of the cycle as act three. Why is this important? Because too often a meeting happens where are we in this journey is not presented. And this is chronically evident to anyone who joins a moving vehicle such as Tango, right? Cloud has been on a meteoric trajectory over the last few months. And I've hopped on, and perhaps there's a degree of ignorance on my part. I'm new. I don't know what stage are we in. I don't know the context of the conversation. That's a possibility. But it's also a possibility that others, perhaps even those who are not new, are completely clueless as to what stage of the journey are we in fact in. And these frameworks, and somebody asked me, are these technology frameworks, Ruby on Rails or whatnot? No, they're not technology frameworks. These are purely cognitive frameworks. But sharing these cognitive frameworks means that we're on the same page, stage-wise, journey-wise, etc. What being in meetings is sometimes like, it's as if an actor is, like in a movie, is delivering lines from act one, in act one, and then there's another actor in the act one delivering lines from act three, and a third one delivering acts from act two. Getting everyone on the same page is and understanding where we are and what we're trying to accomplish. The clarity that this gives us will yield productivity of the right sort. And so that is the promise of these frameworks. That is my hope, and that is my intent. Roughly, my goal is to implement a process engineering for cloud that's based on innovation practices, such as shared here. We need to get to a continuous deployment stage and then continuous delivery. Continuous deployment and delivery stages are distinct milestones in this process. And continuous deployment means that myself and the UX team and everybody else involved in the first leg of the journey is churning out enough validated hypothesis to warrant engineering, coding, development effort. And then, of course, the next milestone after that is continuous delivery. This model defines structure, not content. So if you think about a movie and sort of a Joseph Campbellian approach to movies, act one, act two, act three, that's the kind of structure that we're implementing here. So as we move through this process, we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page of the script. So in the hypothesis phase, for example, we're ideating, we're hypothesizing. It's it can use that stage of the process can use a whole lot of divergent thinking. Prioritize insights has to be a little more rigorous, or a lot more rigorous, right? So by having these, so to speak, acts clearly defined, we bring everyone on the same page, and everyone's pulling in the same direction, right? How did the pyramids get built? Everybody pulled in the same direction towards the top. That's how they got built. And you can, we can have additional and other levels of analysis, but that level of analysis is purely evident and undeniable. And so that would be a nice legacy to leave behind if we were so lucky. So the structure is defined. How we fill that content with content is we have hypothesis. We're going to implement them, but it can change. We define time, not metrics. We don't know. We suspect we know what the metrics are. We suspect we know what metrics we need to hit. But we also are fallible human beings who are stupid at times, and we have to be open to change. Proof of work centric. This activity that I'm doing right now is very much along the lines of proof of work. I've asked Jason to encourage his UX team to take all the crumpled up pieces of metaphorical paper that have been thrown in the garbage bin, i.e. the stuff that doesn't make the cut or doesn't get implemented, or it gets implemented eventually in some way, but is produced on daily basis and iterated upon an ongoing basis. They save that stuff. They don't throw it in the garbage bin. I've encouraged Jason to encourage his team to take those things and publish them on LinkedIn as thought leadership content. UX is a fascinating subject. We don't need to talk down to the audience. More geeky, the better. More nerdy, the better. Because part of the activities that we're doing in cloud is figuring out what our marketing strategy is. And we have some ideas around that, but we could do a lot worse than to take the content from our UX team and blow it up. So I hope some of that happens. And of course, Tango being number one is a bit of an ethereal concept that we will continue to refine on ongoing basis. So we've gone from a kind of a framework of 3, and then we looked at the yearly framework, and then we looked at the monthly framework, and now we're going to look at the weekly framework.